The person who runs from love is not running from you. They are running from the version of themselves that your love is forcing them to become. And that distinction will change everything you thought you understood about avoidant attachment, about intimacy, about why the people who seem to care the least are sometimes the ones who are drowning the most. There is a particular kind of pain that comes with loving someone who cannot hold still. Someone who pulls you in close, makes you feel like the center of their world, and then, without warning, disappears behind walls you cannot see and doors you cannot find. And you are left standing there, asking the question that will consume you if you let it. Do they actually love me, or am I just fooling myself? Do not answer that yet, because the answer requires you to understand something most people never learn about how avoidant individuals experience love, and what their behavior is actually signaling beneath the surface. The signs are there. They have always been there. You just did not know what you were looking at. That is what we are going to fix right now. There is a war happening inside the avoidant person you love, and you are not the enemy. You are the trigger. To understand what that means, you have to go back. Not to your relationship, not to the first fight or the first silence or the first time they pulled away without explanation. You have to go back to where they were formed. You have to go back to a child who needed closeness and learned, through experience, through pain, through the slow education of repeated disappointment. That closeness was dangerous, that needing someone was a vulnerability that would be used against them, that the safest version of Love YouTube's summary service was the kind you kept at arm's length, the kind you never fully surrendered to, the kind that could not destroy you because you never let it get close enough to hold a weapon. This is not a theory. This is developmental psychology. John Bowlby, who gave the world attachment theory, spent decades demonstrating that the way a child learns to relate to their primary caregiver becomes the blueprint for every intimate relationship they will ever have. When a caregiver is emotionally unavailable, not necessarily cruel, not necessarily abusive, sometimes simply distracted, dismissive, or unable to attune, the child does not conclude that the caregiver is the problem. The child concludes that their own needs are the problem. They learn to suppress. They learn to self-regulate in isolation. They learn that expressing emotional need produces either nothing or produces something worse than nothing. And so they stop expressing it. They become, in the clinical language, avoidantly attached. But in plain language, they become someone who learned to survive love by needing less of it. That child grows up. They become the person across from you at the dinner table. They become the person who goes silent when you try to have a serious conversation. They become the person who was incredibly warm and present when things were casual, when stakes were low, when the relationship had not yet become real, and who now, in the face of genuine emotional depth, in the face of actual love with actual weight, begins to retreat, begins to find reasons to create distance, begins to do the one thing they learned to do better than anything else in this world: disappear into themselves. And here is what you must understand before anything else, before any of the signs make sense, before any of this becomes useful to you. That retreat, that pulling away, that silence, that sudden coldness is not evidence that they do not love you. In the psychological framework of the avoidant person, retreat is what love produces. The deeper the love, the stronger the retreat, because love, real love, the kind that is starting to matter, the kind that is starting to feel necessary, is the most threatening thing they have ever encountered. It threatens the entire architecture of survival they spent their childhood building. It asks them to need. It asks them to be seen. It asks them to risk the one thing they decided long ago they could never afford to risk: genuine emotional dependence on another human being. So when they run, they are not running from you. They are running from the collapse of every wall they ever built. And the fact that you have brought them to the edge of that collapse, that is the most profound evidence that what they feel for you is real. Now, the first sign: watch carefully, because this one is subtle and most people miss it entirely. The avoidant person who is completely in love with you will contradict themselves constantly, almost compulsively, in ways that seem maddening until you understand what the contradiction is actually telling you. They will tell you they need space and then text you 20 minutes later. They will say they are not looking for anything serious, and then remember every single thing you have ever told them about your life, your fears, your childhood, your dreams. They will pull away for 3 days and then come back with an intensity that takes your breath away. They will insist they are fine alone, that they prefer it, that closeness is not something they particularly value, and then they will do something so tender, so specifically attuned to who you are that it stops you cold. This contradiction is not manipulation. It is not games. It is the behavioral fingerprint of a person who is being pulled in two directions with equal force. The avoidant nervous system has been trained deeply and over years to associate closeness with threat. But the human heart has its own training, its own pull, its own gravity. And when someone comes along who genuinely matters, who penetrates the careful architecture of distance, those two forces collide. The result is contradiction, hot and cold, close and distant, present and disappeared. This is not someone playing with you. This is someone being torn apart by their own feelings and losing the battle to stay detached. The psychologist Diana Fosha, in her work on transformational processes in psychotherapy, describes this phenomenon as the conflict between the defensive self and the authentic self. The defensive self, the one built in childhood to manage emotional threat, wants distance. The authentic self, the one that is actually experiencing love, that is actually moved by your presence, wants connection. In the avoidant person, these two selves are at war, and the war is most intense precisely when the love is most real. If they did not care, there would be no war. There would only be indifference. And indifference does not produce contradiction. Indifference produces nothing. Contradiction in the avoidant person is proof of caring. The second sign is this: they show up for you in actions while they disappear in words. Language is intimate. Language requires you to name what you feel, and naming what you feel requires you to first acknowledge that you feel it, which requires you to lower every defense you have spent a lifetime constructing. For the avoidant person, this is almost physically painful, not metaphorically. Research in effective neuroscience has shown that emotional suppression, the deliberate or habituated dampening of emotional experience, requires genuine cognitive and physiological effort. The avoidant person is not simply being emotionally lazy. They are working constantly and exhaustingly to keep their own emotional experience at a manageable distance. To ask them to then verbalize that experience is to ask them to do two nearly impossible things at once, and so they do not say it. They do not say "I love you" easily or at all. They do not say "I miss you" even when they are sitting alone thinking about you. They do not say "you matter to me" even when you are the first person they think of when something significant happens in their life. The words stay locked. But watch what they do instead. They fix the thing in your apartment you mentioned once in passing 3 weeks ago. They remember that you have a difficult meeting on Thursday, and they check in, not with a grand declaration, but with a single message that lands with the weight of something much larger. They drive across the city in the rain because you sounded off on the phone. They learn how you take your coffee. They notice when something is wrong before you have said a single word. Actions for the avoidant person are how love speaks when language has been made too dangerous to use. When you understand this, you stop waiting for the words, and you start reading the behavior. And what the behavior is telling you in every small and specific act of care is that you have gotten inside somewhere they did not plan to let anyone in. The third sign requires you to pay attention to what happens when you try to leave. The third sign requires you to pay attention to what happens when you try to leave, because here is where the avoidant person reveals themselves most completely, most nakedly, most honestly, even though they will never frame it that way. The avoidant attachment strategy is built on a fundamental illusion, the illusion that they do not need you, that they are fine, that they are self-sufficient in a way that makes your presence a pleasant addition to their life rather than something essential. They maintain this illusion with tremendous effort and tremendous skill. And as long as you are there, as long as you are consistently available, as long as the relationship continues at its careful managed distance, they can sustain the illusion. They can tell themselves that they are choosing this, that they could walk away just as easily, that their contentment is their own creation and has nothing to do with you. And then you pull back and the illusion collapses. Watch what happens when you stop pursuing. When you stop being the one who reaches out first, who closes the distance, who absorbs the inconsistency and keeps showing up anyway. Watch what happens when you begin to invest in your own life with the energy you have been spending trying to decode theirs. Something shifts. Something in them that was carefully, deliberately held in place begins to move. They reach out. They find reasons to be in contact. They appear, sometimes casually, sometimes with an urgency that surprises even them at the edges of your life. The protest behavior, as attachment researchers call it, begins. And protest behavior in the avoidant person is extraordinarily significant because everything in their system is designed to suppress exactly this kind of reaching. For them to override that suppression, for them to reach toward you even when every trained instinct says to maintain distance, the feeling driving that reach has to be powerful enough to break through years of carefully constructed defense. John Gottman, whose research on relationships spans decades and tens of thousands of couples, identified what he called bids for connection. Small, often barely visible attempts one partner makes to reach toward the other. In securely attached people, these bids are relatively obvious. But in avoidant individuals, bids for connection are so minimized, so disguised, so wrapped in casualness or even hostility that they are almost unrecognizable. A text that seems like nothing. A question about your week that sounds like small talk. A joke that is really an attempt to reestablish warmth. These are bids, and when you are pulling away, these bids increase. That increase is the sign. That is the avoidant person's nervous system overriding its own programming because what it stands to lose has become unbearable. Do not mistake this for control. Do not mistake this for the avoidant person simply not wanting to lose a convenient source of attention. You will know the difference by the quality of what they bring when they come back. If they come back with the same distance, the same deflection, the same management of intimacy, that is habit. But if they come back with something softer, something slightly more open, something that feels like they crossed a threshold they had previously refused to cross, that is love breaking through the defense. That is the sign you have been looking for wearing the disguise of an ordinary moment. The fourth sign is one that will disturb you if you are not prepared for it because it does not look like love at all. It looks like anger. It looks like irritability. It looks like the avoidant person being unreasonably difficult precisely in the moments when you are being most loving, most open, most genuinely present with them. There is a concept in psychodynamic theory called the intimacy-anger link. When individuals who have suppressed their emotional needs for years, who have built their entire psychological architecture around not needing, not depending, not being vulnerable, encounter genuine intimacy, the proximity of that intimacy can activate something that feels from the inside like anger. Not because they are angry at you, but because the closeness you are offering is simultaneously what they most deeply want and what their entire system is designed to treat as a threat. The result is a kind of emotional short circuit. The love comes in, the defense activates, and what comes out, because anger is a far more acceptable emotion to the avoidant person than vulnerability, is irritability, criticism, withdrawal laced with sharpness, conflict that seems to appear from nowhere, triggered by something so small it makes no logical sense. If you have experienced this, if you have noticed that the avoidant person in your life seems to pick fights or become cold, precisely when you have just shared something real, precisely when the connection between you has just become particularly genuine and warm, then you have witnessed the intimacy-anger link in action. And while it is painful, while it is confusing, while it is genuinely difficult to receive harshness in a moment when you are offering tenderness, what you need to understand is that the harshness is a measure of the love. The defense only activates with this intensity when the threat is this real. And the threat is only this real when what is at stake, meaning you, meaning the relationship, meaning the possibility of genuine connection, genuinely matters. This does not mean you accept cruelty. This does not mean you allow yourself to be treated poorly in the name of understanding their psychology. Compassion for someone's wound does not require you to let them wound you in turn. But it means that when you see this pattern, when you see the sharpness appearing precisely at the moments of greatest intimacy, you recognize it for what it is. Not rejection, not evidence that you are doing something wrong. Evidence that you have gotten close enough to activate the deepest and most protected part of who they are. Evidence that the love is real and that it is terrifying them. The fifth and final sign is perhaps the most profound, and it is the one that requires the most from you to see clearly because it asks you to look not at what the avoidant person does, but at what they allow. There is a difference between what the avoidant person does and what they permit. They may not initiate deep conversation, but do they stay in it when you begin one? They may not reach for your hand first, but when you reach for theirs, do they pull away or do they hold on? They may not say the words, but when you say them, what happens in their face, in their body, in the quality of their silence? The avoidant person controls their initiations with tremendous precision, but what they allow, what they do not shut down, what they do not deflect, what they sit with, even when every trained instinct tells them to escape, that is where their truth lives. Because choosing to stay in a moment of genuine emotional intimacy for the avoidant person is an act of extraordinary courage. It costs them something real. Every second they sit in vulnerability, every moment they allow closeness rather than engineering distance, is a moment where the entire defensive structure they built to survive is under pressure. And if they are doing that, if they are allowing your closeness, allowing your love, allowing themselves to be seen even imperfectly, even incompletely, even while some part of them is screaming to retreat, then what is happening inside them is nothing less than a revolution. They are choosing you over their own survival strategy. Do you understand the weight of that? They are choosing you over the single most deeply ingrained behavioral pattern they possess, over the reflex that kept them safe when safety was not guaranteed, over the wall that protected them when the world was not yet trustworthy. They are choosing you quietly, imperfectly, without fanfare, without the declarations you might wish for, but they are choosing you. And that choice made against everything in them that says to run is the most honest and complete expression of love that an avoidant person knows how to make. Understanding these 5 signs is only the beginning of what you actually need to grapple with, because knowledge without application is just comfortable theory, and comfortable theory will not save your relationship, will not save them, and most importantly, will not save you from the particular kind of suffering that comes from loving someone who cannot yet love you back in the language you most need to hear. So, let us go deeper. Let us talk about what is actually required of you, not of them, not of the relationship in some abstract sense, but of you specifically as the person who has chosen to love someone whose entire system is wired to resist being loved. The first thing you must understand about your own position in this dynamic is that you have almost certainly been participating in a pattern that feels like devotion, but is functioning like enabling. This is not an accusation. This is one of the most common and most painful traps in all of human relating. The trap of confusing your tolerance for their avoidance with your love for them as a person. You have been patient. You have been understanding. You have read everything you could find about avoidant attachment. You have extended every benefit of the doubt. You have swallowed your own needs again and again in service of not overwhelming them, not triggering their retreat, not becoming the threat that their nervous system has always told them intimacy would become. And in doing all of that, in shrinking yourself, in managing your own emotional expression, in performing a version of needlessness that does not actually represent who you are, you have not helped them heal. You have helped them avoid healing. You have made their avoidance more comfortable, more sustainable, more invisible to them. Because the avoidant attachment strategy only becomes visible to the person who holds it when it begins to cost them something real. When the relationship they are managing from a distance starts to slip away because the other person has genuine needs that are not being met. When the consequence of their distance becomes undeniable. Your endless accommodation has been, however lovingly intended, a removal of exactly that consequence. Carl Rogers, one of the most important figures in humanistic psychology, made a distinction that is essential here. The distinction between empathy and merger. Empathy means you understand someone's experience. You feel with them. You hold space for their pain and their struggle. Merger means you lose yourself in their experience. You organize your entire emotional life around their comfort. You cease to exist as a separate person with separate needs. What you have likely been doing in your love for this avoidant person is not empathy. It is merger. And merger does not serve either of you. It does not serve them because it removes the relational friction that would otherwise gently but persistently invite them toward growth. And it does not serve you because it requires the slow erasure of your own interior life, your own needs, your own legitimate hunger for real reciprocal love. This is perhaps the most difficult truth in this entire conversation, and it is the one most people resist most strongly because it feels like it is asking them to be less loving. It is asking the opposite. It is asking you to love more honestly, to love in a way that includes yourself as someone worthy of love. To stop performing a selflessness that that is actually a kind of self-destruction and start showing up as a person who has needs, who has limits, who deserves reciprocity. Not someday, not when they are finally ready, not after enough patience has been accumulated, but now and consistently and without apology. Because here is what the research on avoidant attachment actually shows about what creates the conditions for change. It is not infinite patience. It is not zero pressure. It is not the careful management of your own emotional expression so that they are never confronted with the reality of your needs. What creates the conditions for the avoidant person to move towards secure functioning is what researchers call a secure base. A partner who is genuinely, stably, consistently themselves, who does not collapse when the avoidant person withdraws, who does not pursue desperately when distance is created, who does not disappear in retaliation, but who also does not pretend that the distance is acceptable when it is not. A partner who remains warm but boundaried, present but not enmeshed, loving but not self-annihilating. That kind of partner is the most threatening and the most healing thing an avoidant person can encounter. Threatening because they cannot be managed, because their presence does not shrink or expand based on the avoidant person's behavior, because they are a separate, solid, autonomous human being. And that solidity is precisely what the avoidant person's system was trained to fear, and precisely what it most desperately needs in order to learn that closeness is survivable. Now, let us talk about something that almost never gets addressed in conversations about avoidant attachment, and it is this: the spiritual and philosophical dimension of what the avoidant person is actually being asked to do when they are being asked to love fully. The existentialist philosopher Martin Heidegger wrote about what he called thrownness, the condition of finding yourself already in a world, already in a situation, already shaped by circumstances you did not choose. The avoidant person was thrown into a relational world that was not safe. They did not choose their attachment history. They did not select the caregiving environment that taught them that emotional need was dangerous. They arrived, as all of us arrive, into circumstances that shaped them before they had any capacity to resist or redirect that shaping. And the person they became, the avoidant person with all their walls and all their distance and all their compulsive self-sufficiency, is in many ways a masterpiece of adaptation. They survived. In the conditions they were given, the strategy they developed was not pathology. It was genius. It was the most intelligent response available to a child who needed to remain functional in a world that could not consistently meet their emotional needs. Here is what that decision actually is. It is not whether to stay or leave. It is not whether to be patient or walk away. The decision, the real one, the one that will determine everything that follows, is whether you are willing to become the kind of person who loves without losing themselves, who understands without disappearing, who holds space for someone else's wound without turning that wound into the architecture of their own imprisonment. The avoidant person in your life is fighting a war inside themselves that began long before you arrived. Your love did not create their fear, but your love has exposed it, has brought it to the surface where it can finally possibly be faced. That is not a small thing. That is an extraordinary thing. And you deserve to stand in the full weight of what that means without minimizing it, without rushing past it, without collapsing it into either blind hope or bitter resignation. Carry this forward, not as a wound, as a weapon forged from clarity, tempered by compassion, sharpened by the absolute refusal to abandon yourself in the name of loving someone else. That is where real love begins. Go build it.